he spells it out, which is, first data centers in space, then stuff on the moon, then Mars, and the light of consciousness extended everywhere. And that's the vision. And if you just take a look at what's going on down here on Earth right now, it seems a bit more like someone is combining a lot of his very costly ventures together and hoping that some magical synergies will emerge.
This is a race between the US and China. Yes, these companies are big, but they have one thing in mind, which is not just to beat each other, but also to beat, the world's second biggest superpower.
Should we have concerns that so much power potentially is in one man's hand, and that man is Elon Musk? Hello and welcome to The Forecast. Elon Musk's SpaceX has acquired his AI startup, merging his two most ambitious companies into a $1 trillion entity, the most valuable private company the world has ever seen. And he says this is only the beginning, describing the merger as the start of a new book in a mission to build space-based data centers, harness the power of the sun, and scale AI far beyond anything possible on our planet Earth. But behind the cosmic ambition lies a bigger question. Is this $1 trillion valuation grounded in reality, or is it another example of Musk's ability to bend markets, investors, and public attention, don't forget, to his unique vision? Well, to discuss it all, we're joined by our economics correspondent at Channel 4 News, Helia Ebrahimi, and Jacob Silverman, who's author of Gilded Rage, Elon Musk, and the Radicalization of Silicon Valley. Jacob, were you expecting this? Because there was sort of chatter about Musk doing something along these lines, wasn't there? And it's not like he hasn't merged his companies before.
Yeah, I think there was some reporting in the last week that he had been looking for some kind of internal tie-up between some of his companies. And as you said, I think this is something that Musk has done before, most recently last year when he combined X and xAI, so his social network and his AI company, both money losers, though the AI company, of course, drains a lot more resources. So this does seem to be in line with his tendencies. It's just doing something on a far bigger scale, perhaps, than we've seen him do before, and really concentrating, as you said, his interests into one big entity.
Yeah, you've both made the point about the xAI aspect of this being sort of loss-making. They're losing $1 billion a month.
I think what Jacob said is quite interesting. This is a pattern. And by the way, it's not always successful. He also requested Tesla investors agree to invest in xAI, and 57% of them said they didn't really fancy it, although he's managed to persuade them now. He is forever trying to conglomerate, as you said, Ciaran, get this power base together, because he thinks that essentially, if you merge these technologies, you are going to win the AI race. Now, whether that is smokescreen, whether that is kind of a call to legitimacy, just by saying, look, we're by being bigger, we're going to, by owning the future, it gives him some kind of foundation, essentially, to say that it's justified that you bring together a business that has NASA contracts, that has EV cars, that has AI compute, and bring it all together and launch it into Mars.
Yeah, Jacob, I mean, he's competing in the AI sphere with Google, with Meta, with OpenAI. There's this rush to build data centers, isn't there? Is it the only way that Elon Musk can compete in the AI sphere is to sort of loop it in with SpaceX, which actually is valuable, is attracting investment, and is making money?
Well, I think the capital expenditures, with AI have gotten so huge that the promises and sort of ideas surrounding him have also had to scale in proportion. I mean, we weren't really hearing about data centers in space before sometime last year, and now it seems to be the latest way forward. And I find it a little dubious, but seems to be Musk's latest promise, is that somehow this can't be done down here on Earth. It can only be done in space.
But by the way, he's not the only one, right? You've got Jeff Bezos up there, you've got Nvidia investing, you've got the former boss of Google, Eric Schmidt. Everybody seems to be looking at space as a cheaper alternative. Why? Because apparently you've got 24/7 solar power you can use, you've got the ability to create data centers without water, perhaps without citizens, without politicians. You've got less regulations. And this race that we've got at the moment where various companies are spending hundreds of billions of pounds trying to build out AI data centers without really the infrastructure in place. That is the problem. The infrastructure, the energy needs, the water needs, they're not in place. And so these companies are looking for easier, cheaper answers.
So is he then, Jacob, sort of going for first mover advantage as the guy that puts data centers in space? So while everyone else is scrabbling around trying to acquire land and energy and water down here on planet Earth, Musk's vision is rather more intergalactic.
Yeah, I think he's trying to leverage what he has with SpaceX, which is that right now they are the leader in putting stuff in space, in launching satellites in particular, and they can do it more cheaply than a lot of their competitors, including Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin. Bezos has talked about putting infrastructure in or manufacturing in space actually for a number of years. So it is kind of this potential first mover advantage. What needs to happen, though, is the cost of putting a kilogram of any material in space or just putting this stuff in space needs to go way down. There needs to be a lot of innovation in how you run a data center, how you replace its hardware every 5 years, perhaps. But it is this dream of them being first and being kind of beyond the strictures of Earth so that, as Helia said, they can access unlimited solar energy, perhaps.
And Helia, just on that point then, I mean, is it potentially, if not now obviously, but in future, going to be cheaper to have data centers in space, going to be more financially viable to do it up there than down here?
That is the claim, that you save both on the energy cost, so that in terms of cooling it's easier. And some of the reports by different consultancy firms claim that it would be 50% cheaper. And of course, you don't have part of the infrastructure around water that you would need here on lowly planet Earth. But of course, all of this feeds Ciaran into Musk's kind of rather grandiose vision of himself, not just creating data centers that, as he put in his blog post, is going to serve, the citizens of Earth, but is actually going to help create serving civilizations that will ultimately end up in Mars. So it is this really big ideas.
Yeah, you can't fault the ambition, Jacob, can you? But I mean, I don't know. It feels like this is all happening so quickly, and then today here we are talking about maybe factories on the moon, Jacob?
Yeah, it could seem a little grandiose, certainly, and also just like ripped from the sci-fi novels of Musk's youth, which has always been a way he's seen the world or the universe, the cosmos. I mean, he has long said he wants to name his city on Mars Terminus after an Isaac Asimov novel or series of novels. And I would encourage people actually to go to the SpaceX website and read the blog post that Helia was referring to, because he spells it out, which is, first data centers in space, then stuff on the moon, then Mars, and the light of consciousness extended everywhere. And that's the vision. And if you just take a look at what's going on down here on Earth right now, it seems a bit more like someone is combining a lot of his very costly ventures together and hoping that some magical synergies will emerge.
But if you peel away, Helia, some of the space stuff, is this actually quite a cool-headed business decision? Because you've got the xAI, which is losing money, folded in with SpaceX, which is going to float publicly, we think, sometime this year. That one can subsidize the other. SpaceX needs AI, AI needs SpaceX, doesn't it?
His other businesses, people like, companies like Tesla, which he wants to work with xAI as well. He wants xAI to be making, operational AI programs within those cars as well. He wants Tesla to move into a robotics firm. Yeah, I mean, clearly there is a industrial use case. From a capital perspective, there's been lots of talk about the huge funds. I saw a report that was suggesting that, there are 10 AI startups that saw just last year alone their valuation increase by $1 trillion. That's, companies including OpenAI. These are AI startups. So these are huge amounts of valuation being added to this company. I mean, in fact, even just in this deal alone, I would tell you that SpaceX, he's upped the valuation just from December. It's gone up by $200 or so billion for SpaceX's value. So the kind of money you're talking about is huge. The kind of capex required to build out the infrastructure is huge. And so all of these businesses at the moment, all of these companies are busy trying to create some kind of circular financing, some ways of bringing money in. And by bringing money into an enlarged group, a super company that's going to list on the stock market and raise all of this cash, it also not only does it give that company money to spend, it kind of starves the ecosystem and his rivals from getting some of that capital.
Because he wants to compete, doesn't he, in the AI field, but he hasn't got the capital in xAI to do it, has he?
Well, I think exactly, and I think that there is a feeling within tech bosses in the US that it's winner take all, and therefore you should do everything you can to build out as fast as you can, to go towards AGI as fast as you can, because the gains are going to be so massive. So it doesn't matter if you inflate the industry along the way. It doesn't matter if there's a whole lot of market turmoil, because there will be one or two companies at the end who will, reap the rewards.
And if it's winner take all, Jacob, isn't it? I mean, Elon Musk going to want to be the winner.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely his motivation, and I think as we're getting at here, that the winner is going to come, at least the popular notion among a lot of these startups and these big incumbent tech companies, is that the winner is coming by just spending the most money and scaling the infrastructure as much as possible. I mean, there has been some questioning within the AI industry that, is just scaling LLMs, the sort of current models we have, the way to go. But that certainly seems to be what Musk thinks. I think also the point about how SpaceX was valued at $800 billion before, just in December, and now $1 trillion now, shows also how this kind of scaling is working, which is that the more often he does these deals, including just raising capital every couple months, it seems, for AI purposes in some of his companies, every time he gets to kind of pump up their value and say they're worth more. And this is also part of kind of the circular economy that Musk has made for himself, what's been called the Muskonomy. I mean, he's always kind of, if not merging things, then doing deals between his companies, frequently now raising capital, especially for xAI. And each time there's more money being spent, more money being raised, but also a higher valuation on paper for these companies.
But you can't just make up numbers. I mean, if you're going to float...
Can't you, Ciaran?
If you're going to float this new super company, Helia, surely there has to be some sort of basis in reality for it. I know AI, everyone is overinflating left, right, and centre, but I don't know. What do you think?
Listen, I think the problem you have at the moment is there is so much investor appetite in AI that you get this kind of real sense of fear of missing out. And that blinds people to what those valuations mean. What are you looking for? Are you looking for profits? Well, all of these companies are potentially going to fail. Are you looking for growth? And then what kind of growth are you talking about? And what are the hurdles? And a lot of investors in the current wave have been, pushing aside red flags, really, because they're so desperate to be involved and be included on some of these big name tickets, because the gains that we're talking about, the way these companies talk up, what Nvidia is going to mean. I mean, there are VC firms that think, well, if we don't buy in, we're going to miss out completely. And I think the same is true, or this is what Musk would obviously like you to believe, that if you are not investing here, that you are not going to be part of this new industrial revolution, this AI revolution, which is going to completely change the economy.
But the more Elon Musk merges his various enterprises, Jacob, are you investing in any one of those companies in reality, or are you now in future just, whether it's Tesla or SpaceX, just investing in Elon Musk?
I think it's the latter, and this is certainly a move towards what's been called Musk Corp or Musk Inc. Just one large Musk megacorp. And given how involved he's always been in his companies, spread across 5 or 6 of them at any given time, at least. It's always been about, I think, for a lot of his investors, investing in Musk, and that's why also we see a lot of the same investors investing across the Musk companies. I mean, this is venture capitalists, certain financiers who are friends with Musk, and also the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds, especially Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And a number of these entities have repeatedly kind of ponied up for Musk, or multiple rounds of xAI, for example. And
he's building data centers out there too.
Yeah, and so I think this is very much about using those resources and sort of that strength of personality and celebrity that only he can seem to bring to bear on these mega projects.
Do you think that's going to carry through when he floats this mega company, if it happens this summer? Then, Jacob, that force of personality, or are investors looking for something else?
Well, I think there's a question of when will the music stop, and there have to be some major returns and actual innovations here. I mean, the same might be said for some of the other AI companies, especially like OpenAI, which is committed to spending more than $1 trillion on data center infrastructure, but doesn't necessarily have that money and doesn't show signs of having that kind of revenue ahead. So Musk can kind of carry on this kind of dance longer, I think, especially as he does these mergers and he has such a wide portfolio of interests. But eventually some of these returns will finally have to materialize. And, he has been able to push the ball down the road with things like full self-driving. His promises keep changing. But, just this week he said that there'll be
changing quite a lot, actually.
Yes,
Jacob,
and just...
Right? I mean, like, he fails his own metrics quite often.
Yeah.
But he does seem to get forgiven by his investors, which is extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. And, he has said just this week we're going to have data centers in space within 2 to 3 years. I mean, last month he was saying in 5 years. Is any of this stuff going to happen? And especially some of these major investors like the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds kind of get tired of this eventually, because they will need their returns, even as they want the kind of influence over Musk that they can have already.
Well, if you're talking about actual market performance, we got some Tesla car sales numbers, didn't we, in Europe recently? I think they were down like 42%. In France, year on year to January, they only sold 661 in the month of January. I mean, those are some worrying numbers if you're an investor in Tesla, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, it's no longer an EV firm, Ciaran. It's now going to be a robotics firm and a taxi firm. So don't worry about that. I mean, BYD, obviously, when it comes to Tesla, he's had a real encroachment into the top spots by Chinese BYD, especially in Europe. And then you've had all of these tax subsidies taken away in Trump's presidency, and that has really damaged Tesla, but he is trying to pivot now to robotics. I can't remember what is his robot called. Oh, yeah, exactly.
Do you think he's given up on cars, Jacob? Do you think he's all robots now?
Well, this is the thing I mean, he seems so committed to Tesla, but now, suddenly it's robots. And I mean, the few demonstrations we've seen of Optimus have been unimpressive, and a number of them there's been confirmed reporting that these were basically remote controlled by human operators. I mean, I think Musk is running out of runway and promises he can make in some ways. And I think the point about the BYD cars is very important, the Huawei and other Chinese brands. We had the CEO of Ford talking about how he bought one of the Chinese cars, I believe a Huawei or BYD, had it brought to the U.S. and he loved it and felt rather jealous of it. And as you said earlier, the numbers aren't there. I mean, the sales are dropping around the world. And, this is also about Musk politics, which is, Tesla was how he was reaching a lot of consumers and also his sort of soft underbelly. And now he has alienated a lot of people, especially in Europe, where he's very active in kind of right-wing agitation. And people would rather buy cars that are cheaper and better and don't come with that kind of political baggage attached.
But if we're talking about competition with China, and then you look at a company like SpaceX, which is now going to be even bigger, it's unique, isn't it? SpaceX, there's nobody else doing what SpaceX is doing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of Musk's remaining strengths, which is that the U.S. government, certainly the Department of Defense, needs SpaceX for its launch capabilities and has subsidized it to that extent and given it a lot of contracts. What might be a little weaker about SpaceX, and this is, again, speaks to the kind of person Musk is and trying to fulfill these science fictional fantasies, is the amount of money that's been invested in Starship and this plan to eventually go to Mars. I mean, he has kind of ignored, or at least not emphasized, the core business of basically satellite launch and putting cargo into space, which they do pretty well. But also, in favor of paying a lot of money and pouring a lot of resources into this dream of making a massive starship that can take us deeper into the cosmos.
But it's interesting, Ciaran, that he's really infiltrated the kind of NASA contract space. When SpaceX was first formed, they undercut rivals. They bid really cheaply. Back in 2002 or 2008, and now all of these contracts, I mean, it's very hard to imagine how NASA could have the capabilities to ferry their equipment and their astronauts to the Space Center without SpaceX. So these are companies that are using, government contracts, taxpayer money, essentially, to help them grow, to help them develop. And then, of course, they become very powerful, very dominant. And it's very hard for governments then to pull themselves out of these relationships.
So let's go big picture, about like what on earth is he actually up to, or what in space is he actually up to, you might say, in this scenario? Because is he this visionary that is able to see into the future in the way that nobody else can? Or is he just a sort of a risk taker and a gambler? Which is it?
Well, I would say more the latter, but also he is someone who kind of drags us into his vision of the future. I mean, because of especially now the amount of resources he can deploy, Musk has put more satellites into space than anyone. And a lot of that now supports Starlink, this global communications network that he has done a lot to hype and that provides a useful service to some, but is maybe not the kind of innovation he has claimed it to be. But again, we are often kind of being forced to play by Musk's rules. So if he wants to put 1 million satellites into space, despite whatever negative consequences there might be, but that's the new promise, then we might, given his power and tremendous resources, just have to follow along and watch as he enacts that.
It's interesting. When I interviewed Jensen Huang from the NVIDIA boss, I asked him about Musk. He was very kind of diplomatic on saying, he doesn't agree with his politics necessarily, but that as a technologist, he is a visionary. So I think within the tech community, he's seen as a visionary. He clearly knows how to leverage his celebrity to exert as much power and influence as possible. I mean, I remember when he originally bought X, which was Twitter, for $44 billion, people were thinking, what is this all about? And there's obviously an argument to say it was about political power, but it's clearly also this idea that the technologies of the future, where compute is important, where AI is important, where data is important, bringing all of these things together helps your business grow. So you are able to train your chatbot, you're able to train Grok on this vast data that is created by users on X. So the synergies that he is able to create and take advantage of, basically, are huge.
You mentioned Grok, Helia, and we obviously had that scandal in the past few weeks about image generation on Grok, and that's just one small aspect of his empire, and it was very problematic for him.
And there's pushback, by the way, there's pushback in France where there's been a raid, there's pushback even in the US. So it's not that he's completely unencumbered, but, his power base is extraordinary.
Yeah, but at the same time, we were talking about something much bigger potentially here, aren't we? I mean, you said it's the biggest private company in the world that he's about to create, Jacob. I mean, should we have concerns that so much power potentially is in one man's hand, and that man is Elon Musk?
Certainly, and I think we've seen some pretty negative consequences already. And I think no one needs that much money or power, and there are uniquely distorting effects from having so much wealth. I mean, we could talk about the 2024 election alone, and I think actually the point about Musk buying Twitter/X for $44 billion and people kind of thinking, what is he going to do with this, is a good one, because we saw what he ended up doing with it, which was that it helped him essentially win the 2024 election and become this enormous propagandist on behalf of far-right issues, and often spread false information and some horrible lies about people. So that is a way in which Musk has unique capabilities, and I think ones that might be harmful to democracy. And I don't think in a lot of ways the costs of Musk are necessarily worth the supposed societal benefits, and I think that's what people are starting to see now. But with a $1.2 trillion company, or however big it might be by the time it goes public this summer, he'll have a lot that he'll be able to do.
And Ciaran, I mean, these are questions at the moment that are particularly pertinent because given everything that is happening in geopolitics, where Europe is having to reevaluate its relationship with the US, again, that discussion about, do we just become takers of American tech infrastructure is even more important, because if we have problems with some of these companies, European countries have very little leverage in reality. And there's been lots of talk through the years, I remember, of Europe creating their own versions, creating alternatives. But fundamentally, we are now doing in AI exactly what we did with social media companies and search engines, where we are a taker of US technology, US tech infrastructure. I mean, one example that I think of all the time is something that we have a lot of data on in this country, in the UK, is health, because the NHS brings all of, the population's countries' data together. I mean, not perfectly, by the way, but it does theoretically bring our whole country's health records together, which is an incredible source to train AI on. And during COVID, the government gave another US company, Palantir, the contract to help us with some COVID contracts, and Palantir did it for £1. But by the way, 2 years later, once the pandemic was over, we were signing over multi-100 million pound deals with Palantir to do different NHS contracts, and not just NHS. It then escalated to be MOD contracts as well. And in that way, we are opening ourselves, making us more susceptible in fields possibly where we have the ability to have homegrown talent, but we haven't invested there.
Not really, but to be honest, I don't think they need to. There's a lot lacking, perhaps in the European tech scene. And I think Helia was getting at, this kind of dependency that is unfortunately the case. The same kind of dependency that maybe the Department of Defense here in the U.S. has on Musk, Europe has on a lot of U.S. tech companies. But I think we don't need necessarily European CEOs talking about going to the moon or Mars, but we do need viable alternatives and a kind of homegrown tech scene and the kind of regulations and laws and enforcement that European countries want for themselves. I mean, we did see a little bit of that today with French authorities raiding the X office in Paris because the Grok chatbot has been creating sexualized images of people without their consent. So it will be up to, I think, to Europe and to European countries about what kind of future they want to create there and how to get there. But that thought is in the air now, just as Europe is trying to think more about its own self-defense and its role in NATO and its relationship with the United States. That same kind of reevaluation of its relationship with U.S. tech companies and U.S. billionaires is ongoing, I think.
And you mentioned it earlier, Jacob, about Musk Inc. and about that potentially being where we're headed here, that all the various Musk entities get folded into one with him at the top of it. I mean, how soon do you think we could be seeing something like that? And that's not a given either, is it? There are obstacles before you can get somewhere like that.
Yeah, I think there's one question about first. Tesla is the one publicly traded company at the moment in his portfolio. That might have to stay sort of nominally independent that way. But I don't see much reason why all of his other companies might be combined together. I mean, what do we have left? We have the Boring Company, Neuralink, some of his smaller interests. Neuralink could be lumped in with robotics and AI. So I think Musk is someone who likes a lot of control, of course, like a lot of billionaires, and has long seen his own role as kind of centralizing all these interests together. So if the investors are on board for another round or two of this, I think by next year you could see most of Musk's non-Tesla companies be just under SpaceX or under some one X company.
And where would that sit then, Helia, in terms of the pantheon of big, powerful, great companies in the world right now?
Well, at the moment, NVIDIA is the world's biggest company, listed company. I think that's on about $4.5 trillion. So you have Microsoft, which had a bit of a stumble last week. You have Google, Alphabet, the owner of Google. So these are huge, vast companies. And I think it's back to that idea of there being a race. And this isn't just a race between companies, private companies or listed companies. This is a race between the US and China, and the anxieties that lots of companies feel in the US about losing out to China as a tech behemoth, as an AI behemoth. And when we're talking about, being able to conglomerate data, the best in class is really the Chinese government. No one really competes with that. So yes, these companies are big, but they are all they have one thing in mind, which is not just to beat each other, but also to beat, the world's second biggest superpower.
Yeah, quite. And potentially to have more power than the governments that we elect, right, Jacob?
Yes, and I think that is one concerning thing, of course, about the power of tech companies and the geopolitical role they play now. I think one important distinction also here that we should note is that most of the companies we're talking about, or the competitors to Musk, are publicly traded. Not all of them, like OpenAI, of course, but these most valuable companies in the world. And because of the way public markets work, and for example, SEC filings here in the U.S., we know more about what these companies do and the profits they generate and where they get their revenue from. And if we have some giant Musk Corp that's privately held, which is where we are right now, we know a lot less about how his business empire operates and is it making money? Is it making profits? So That is a little bit of a different animal, I think, than the comparisons to NVIDIA or Google or Microsoft are really important, but also that distinction, I think, will make it a different kind of operator.
Yeah, there will have to be a prospectus, Ciaran. There will have to actually be, line items about where the revenue is coming from, about what the margin is, about who the customers are. All of that detail will be, a level of transparency we haven't seen before. And even today's deal, there's scant information about it. And that, if this company becomes listed, will change.
Well, let's end where we started then, with the prospect, of this new merged company actually being listed. I mean, there's going to be a lot of hype around that, isn't there? It's going to be one of the biggest things that the market has seen for quite some time.
Yeah, I was curious when I was reading about this merger yesterday on Bloomberg, I believe, just on the news site. And right below the news article about it, there was an opportunity to click to find out how to invest in SpaceX, how I could buy shares. And so I think that is very indicative of what you were saying. This is going to be a sort of mass consumer event, of course, but also a big market event. But because of Musk's celebrity and the kind of public-facing nature of him and his companies, this is going to be more than just another big M&A.
Would you compare it, Helia, to sort of the early 2000s when we saw some of the big tech companies go public then?
Well, I mean, we are definitely in a bubble, which is what you're alluding to. I think the question here is, it's always, you get that same kind of comparison, which is, can you be in a bubble and can the bubble burst, but still the technology is transformative and the survivors of that burst bubble make such significant gains that everyone needs to be invested. And I think that is the problem we have at the moment, is that even though you've had all of the chief executives and founders from these AI companies all concede themselves that there is an AI bubble, you are still having money flowing into this sector. You are still having both VC money flow in, and you're still having the idea of these mega IPOs. I mean, to raise $30 billion, $50 billion on the stock market is a huge quantum of money. I think the next biggest was Saudi Aramco on something like $29 billion. And by the way, they were quite a simple company. They had, oil revenue, and you could see that. So investors knew what they were buying into. Here, I think it's about when does, as Jacob was saying, when does the music stop? Do they get to IPO before there is some real market volatility? Because that changes the equation completely.
Are you in the predictions game, Jacob? Do you like a prediction?
Only as a hobby, I guess. It's not one I've monetized yet on these new prediction markets.
I was going to ask you when the music's going to stop.
I'm a skeptic, and I guess I've been wondering that about Musk. I mean, I think some of it is based on his own personal behavior. I mean, he has been, of course, more erratic, and can he sort of maintain some of the alliances and the veneer, at least, of legitimacy that he needs? But I think we'll probably get to some kind of public offering this summer and see where we might proceed from there. But, in the next few years, some of his fantastical predictions will finally have to come true and start returning revenue. And I think that's when the music does stop.
Jacob Silverman, author of Gilded Rage, Elon Musk and the Radicalization of Silicon Valley. That was really interesting. Thank you so much. And Helia Ebrahimi, our economics correspondent here at Channel 4 News as well. You've been listening to The Forecast. See you again soon.